right, just blame Bill. That is the route both the White House and Congressman Joe Sestak are taking tonight to try and explain away the controversy surrounding Sestak's Senate run. So is it any coincidence that just yesterday President Clinton paid a visit to the White House to have lunch with President Obama and help him greet the men's U.S. World Cup soccer team? Or was that just a front for the real reason they needed to meet? To get their story straight before releasing the latest version of an increasingly twisted tale of events to the public. Now, by making the former president the scapegoat, it shows just how desperate the administration is to give itself some level of deniability and distance from the situation. But despite this new revelation, the story is still not adding up, and Republicans, well, they're still not buying it.
We find this to be less than fully credible, and it raises more questions than answers.
All right, so does Bill Clinton's alleged involvement actually make things worse for the White House? Joining me now is former Speaker of the House and the author of the New York Times brand new bestseller, To Save America. We now have former Speaker of the House, Gingrich, with us. Mr. Speaker, thanks for being here.
It's good to be with you.
You buy this story?
Well, first of all, I don't buy it as a story. The idea that you're going to go to somebody and say, why don't you give up a U.S. Senate seat because you can get a non-paying advisory position?
Yeah.
That mean there's something that just doesn't make sense, but I think it's a big mistake for a different reason. When you bring in former President Clinton, you elevate the story. You now have two presidents involved, the current president and the last Democratic president. You have a question of who told Clinton. Apparently, Clinton says it was Rahm Emanuel. Now, did Rahm Emanuel say randomly to President Clinton, you know, why don't you see if you can get him out of the race? Or did Rahm Emanuel talk to the President of the United States and say, you know, I think we can get Bill Clinton involved. Maybe he can get him out of the race. You know, there are a lot of different pieces here. And I think what's beginning to happen is what happens every time you mishandle this kind of a scandal. The only effective way for a president to protect the presidency is to cut your losses very early, get it over with, get to the truth, and protect the presidency. And yet the human temptation, particularly on the part of your staff, is to go in the opposite direction. And so it looks to me like they're now trying to set up a story that the press will just inch by inch take apart. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't fit what Sestak said originally. You've played what he said originally. He said it came from the White House. Now, maybe he was convinced that Bill Clinton was the White House's emissary, in which case they haven't gained anything in legal terms because it means that the former President Clinton was acting on behalf of Rahm Emanuel.
He said a lot of things that don't make sense now. He said it was a job. This doesn't sound like a job to me, to be on an advisory committee. He said it was the administration that made the offer. As far as I know, Bill Clinton is not a member of the administration. If anything, he's been at odds with President Obama. He said it was high-ranking. Now, I agree with your analysis. I don't believe this is, I would not define this as high-ranking. Secretary of Navy, high-ranking. Administration, cabinet position, high-ranking. This doesn't fit the definition of high-ranking to me.
Let me offer you a suggestion that, having written novels and having been a historian, what if there were two conversations? I can imagine a conversation with Bill Clinton that's about what they're describing. And that's not the conversation Sestak is describing. I can imagine a second conversation with a high-ranking official in the White House about a full-time job. And in a sense, what they're trying to do right now is drag the Clinton story across the front, hope that the press will follow Clinton, and forget that there's another, second, deeper story, which I suspect involves Rahm Emanuel.
I share your suspicion, and we're told that Emanuel is in this. And David Axelrod, very interestingly, earlier this week went out of his way to say, it wasn't me, I had no conversations about this. And I felt, in saying that, he was pointing directly at Rahm Emanuel. That was my suspicion. But it seems that it doesn't really matter. Now, we're going to have our panel of legal experts here in a minute. But any way you cut this, this would still, by my interpretation of the law, still be a thing of value for a political act, which is against the law. U.S. Code 18, U.S. Code 600, 18, U.S. Code 210, 211. We've gone over these provisions in great detail. They're very clear, Mr. Speaker.
But let me also point out, on the radio show today we were discussing, you also have this case in Colorado, and you have the case, remember, with Blagojevich, who asserts that people approached him about a Senate seat. So you could all of a sudden have a pattern of 3 different places where people were engaged in conversations that range from seriously wrong to felonies. And all 3 of these begin to paint, now the White House is going to have to say, well, Illinois didn't occur, Colorado didn't occur, Pennsylvania didn't occur. That's an awful lot of examples for something which isn't happening.
Yeah, I agree. Now, we spoke earlier here, and you were talking about the almost instinctive response is the opposite of what the staff of the president should have. They want to cover it up. They want this to go away rather than, to use your words, cutting their losses and moving on here. Do you see an analogy, for example, with Watergate?
Absolutely. The thing to remember is very often it's the staff who are protecting themselves, and they're prepared to spend the president to protect themselves, which is very bad policy if you're the president of the United States. You never want to weaken the presidency in order to protect a staff person who may be guilty of something. And the presidents who are the most successful, Ronald Reagan in Iran-Contra, Dwight Eisenhower involving his chief of staff in 1958, they're very tough-minded about cutting their losses and saying, look, you did something that's indefensible. I need to protect the presidency. You've been a great friend, a good chief of staff. Goodbye. The ones who get in big trouble like Nixon start trying to cover it up.
All right, Mr. Speaker, we're going to be watching this and following this. I believe this is not a story that is going away anytime soon. We have more questions right now than answers, but we do appreciate you coming out on the special Friday holiday edition of Hannity tonight. Thank you.